Some acts of kindness are so pure they stop kings in their tracks, the kind that strips away every layer of pretense and power, until all that remains is humility before something greater than yourself. For King Theon, the immortal beast king who had ruled for 3 centuries and commanded armies that could level mountains, that moment came in the form of a woman in threadbare clothes, kneeling in snow, feeding wolves from her own meager rations while singing them lullabies like they were children. He'd been tracking a rogue pack that had been terrorizing farms along the northern border, 30 wolves moving as one, attacking livestock with coordinated precision that suggested something more than animal instinct. His scouts had followed them to the Frostwood, where they found something impossible. The wolves, these supposedly vicious killers, were lying peacefully around a small cottage, their heads resting on the lap of a woman who looked like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. And when King Theon emerged from the tree line with his guards, weapons drawn, ready to end the threat, he watched this woman stand between his soldiers and the wolves with nothing but her body and her voice, and say the words that would change everything. "They are not yours to kill. They are mine to protect, and I will die before I let you harm them." Maren had always been different. Even as a child in the village of Coldbrook, she'd been the one who talked to animals like they understood, who could calm aggressive dogs with a touch, who brought injured birds home and nursed them back to health with a patience that baffled her practical, hard-working parents. Her father was a woodcutter, her mother a laundress. They were good people who worked honest jobs and expected their daughter to follow a similarly straightforward path. Marriage, children, a simple life. But Maren had never fit simple. By 15, she could walk through the forest alone without fear, because the animals recognized her as something other than threat or prey. By 20, she'd gained a reputation as someone who could gentle even the most violent creatures. Farmers brought her horses that bucked and bit. Hunters brought her trapped animals they couldn't release safely. She handled them all with the same quiet certainty, and they responded. Her parents worried she'd never find a husband, because men were unsettled by women who spoke to wolves like sisters and understood ravens better than people. They were right to worry. Maren tried marriage once, to a merchant son who thought her strangeness was charming until he realized it was fundamental. He wanted a wife who'd manage his household and raise his children and attend social functions without embarrassing him. Maren wanted to spend her days in the forest, learning the languages of creatures most people feared. The marriage lasted 8 months before he left, and Maren felt nothing but relief. Her parents died within a year of each other when she was 25. Fever took her mother. Grief took her father. Maren sold their cottage to pay burial costs and moved to the edge of Frostwood with nothing but a pack of supplies and a determination to finally live the life she'd always been meant for. She built a tiny cottage from salvaged wood and stone, survived on foraged food and occasional work making herbal remedies for villagers brave enough to seek her out. And slowly, carefully, she built relationships with the forest's inhabitants. First the small creatures, rabbits and squirrels and birds, then the deer and foxes. Finally, after 3 years of patient work, the wolves. They'd been wary at first, these apex predators who trusted nothing human. But Maren didn't approach them like a human. She learned their body language, their vocalizations, their social structures. She left food at the edges of their territory, never expecting reciprocation. She sang to them from a distance, low, wordless melodies that carried no threat. Gradually, they accepted her presence, then her proximity, then, miracle of miracles, her touch. The pack that adopted her territory was led by an aging alpha female, Maren called Silver for the gray marking across her muzzle. Silver had been injured, a badly healed break in her rear leg that made hunting difficult. Maren spent weeks treating it with poultices and careful manipulation, and Silver responded by bringing her pack to Maren's cottage, not as threats, as family. For 5 years, this arrangement worked. Maren lived in harmony with creatures most people feared. The wolves hunted in the deep forest, away from farms and villages. Marin ensured they had supplemental food during harsh winters when prey was scarce. She treated their injuries and sicknesses. She learned their individual personalities and became fluent in their communication. She was happier than she'd ever been, even if that happiness came with poverty and isolation. Then came the winter when everything fell apart. A drought the previous summer had devastated the deer population. The wolves' normal prey base collapsed. Hunger made them desperate. They started ranging closer to farmland, taking livestock because there was nothing else. Farmers panicked, called for hunters. The hunters failed because this pack was too coordinated, too intelligent. So the farmers petitioned the king. And the king, who understood that 30 hungry wolves near populated areas was a crisis waiting to explode, came personally to handle it. Marin knew they were coming. The wolves told her in their way, agitated and afraid. She'd been rationing her own food to feed them, keeping them close to her cottage and away from the farms, but it wasn't enough. They were starving. She was starving. And now soldiers were coming to kill the only family she had left.
She made a choice that morning. If they were going to die, they'd die together. She gathered what little food she had left, walked out into the snow, and called her pack. They came, all 30 of them, and she fed them one last time, gave them every scrap she had, while singing the lullaby Silver had always loved, a wordless melody her own mother used to hum. She was mid-song when she heard the soldiers approaching, when she looked up and saw King Theon himself standing at the clearing's edge with a drawn sword, when she understood that this was the end. But she didn't run, didn't beg. She stood, placed herself between the wolves and the soldiers, and said the only thing that mattered. They are not yours to kill. They are mine to protect, and I will die before I let you harm them. The forest went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. King Theon stared at this woman, this stranger who should have been terrified, but instead stood like a shield made of nothing but conviction, and felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt in decades: recognition. "Stand down," he ordered his soldiers. Then he did something that shocked everyone present. He sheathed his sword, dropped to one knee in the snow, and bowed his head. "Explain yourself," he said, not as a command, but as a request. "Tell me who you are and why these wolves answer to you, and maybe, just maybe, we can find a solution that doesn't end in death." Marin told him everything: the years building trust, the relationships forged through patience and respect, the injury that had started it all, and the family she'd found in creatures most people only feared. She explained the drought, the collapsed prey base, the desperate hunger that drove normally cautious wolves to risk farms. She showed him her own emaciated frame, evidence that she'd been giving them everything she had. The king listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood and approached her slowly. The wolves tensed but didn't attack because Marin remained calm. He stopped 3 feet away and studied her with those ancient eyes that had seen centuries of human behavior. "You're starving yourself to feed them." "Yes." "Why?" "Because they're my family. Because I won't abandon them when things get hard. Because someone has to protect the creatures everyone else only wants to destroy." He glanced at the wolves, then back at her. "I can shift into a wolf myself. Did you know that? It's why they call me the Beast King. I've spent 300 years able to take that form, and in all that time I've never seen a human build the kind of bond you have with a wild pack. How is it possible?" Marin met his gaze steadily. "Because I don't see them as beasts or weapons or threats. I see them as people with fur. They have families and feelings and fears just like us. They deserve respect, not extermination." "You speak like a fanatic." "I speak like someone who actually understands what you become when you shift.
The words hung in the cold air like a challenge. Theon's expression shifted from skepticism to something more complex. Show me. What? Show me this bond you claim. Let me see how deep it goes. Marin turned to Silver, who was watching the exchange with wary intelligence. She knelt and extended her hand. The old Alpha approached, limping slightly, and pressed her massive head against Marin's palm. Marin began to hum, and the entire pack relaxed. She switched to words, speaking to Silver in a mixture of sounds that were half human language and half wolf vocalization, explaining who Theon was, what he could become, asking for trust. Silver looked directly at the king. Then, impossibly, she approached him and sat, the posture of an equal meeting an equal. Not submission, respect. Theon felt something crack open in his chest. In 300 years of shifting, he'd never been acknowledged as kin by a wild wolf. They either fled or attacked, seeing him as threat or competition. But this ancient Alpha looked at him with recognition, seeing the wolf under the human skin. He shifted without thinking, let the transformation take him from man to massive silver-gray wolf in seconds. His soldiers stepped back in shock, because most had never seen the king's beast form. But Marin didn't flinch, and Silver didn't attack. Instead, the old Alpha approached Theon's wolf form and touched noses, the traditional wolf greeting between pack members. The rest of the pack followed, one by one, accepting this strange king wolf as something worthy of acknowledgement. When Theon shifted back to human form, his face was wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. In 3 centuries, he'd never been accepted as pack, never found others like himself, never stopped being profoundly alone in his dual nature. You did this, he said to Marin, his voice rough. You built this family. How? She smiled, sad and knowing.
The same way you build any family, with patience and love and the willingness to see beyond surfaces. They're not vicious killers, Your Majesty. They're just hungry and scared, like most creatures that get labeled dangerous. He looked at this woman who had nothing but gave everything, who understood his nature better than anyone he'd met in centuries, who'd been willing to die for her pack. I'm going to help you, both of you, all of you, but I need you to trust me. Marin studied him, this immortal king who just bowed before her and wept at being accepted by wolves. Then she nodded. All right, but if you betray them, I'll spend the rest of my life making you regret it. He laughed, surprised and genuine. I believe you. Come on, we have work to do. What followed was a negotiation unlike anything the kingdom had seen. Theon established what he called the Frostwood Sanctuary, a protected territory where the wolf pack could live and hunt without fear of extermination.
He imported deer from regions with healthy populations to restore the prey base. He positioned guards to prevent farmers from encroaching on sanctuary boundaries and wolves from leaving them. And he offered Marin a formal position as keeper of the sanctuary, with a salary, resources, and royal authority to protect her pack. The court was horrified. You're paying a woman to feed wolves, Lady Seraphina sputtered during a council meeting. This is insanity. I'm paying a woman who understands animal behavior better than anyone in this kingdom to maintain peace between humans and predators, Theon corrected coldly. She prevented a massacre. She's built something I've been trying to understand for 300 years, and she will have every resource she needs. The council grumbled but didn't dare contradict him. Marin moved into a proper cottage built at the sanctuary's edge. She finally had enough food, warm clothing, medical supplies for both herself and her pack.
The wolves thrived with restored prey populations. Attacks on farms ceased completely, and Marin, for the first time in her life, didn't have to choose between survival and her calling. Theon visited regularly, partly to check on the sanctuary's progress, partly because being near Marin and her pack eased a loneliness he'd carried for centuries. She taught him things about wolf behavior he'd never known, despite his ability to shift. The subtle communication styles, the complex social hierarchies, the way pack bonds formed and strengthened.
He shared what it felt like to shift, the strange duality of being both human and wolf, never quite fitting in either world. One evening, 6 months into the sanctuary's operation, they sat by her fire while the pack dozed around them. Silver had her head on Marin's lap, the old alpha finally content. "Do you regret it?" Theon asked. "The isolation? The poverty? Choosing this life?" Marin was quiet for a moment. Then, "No. This is who I am." "I tried being what people expected, and it nearly killed me. Out here, with them, I'm finally myself. Even when it was hard? Especially then, because the hard parts proved it mattered, that what I was protecting was worth protecting." He watched firelight play across her face. "You understand something most people never learn, that true strength isn't dominance. It's the ability to be vulnerable and gentle with things that could destroy you. The wolves could kill you in seconds, but they don't, because you've earned their trust through years of consistent care. That's real power." She smiled. "Coming from a man who can level armies, I'll take that as a compliment. From a man who's been lonely for 300 years, it's more than a compliment. It's recognition." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw past the king to the person underneath, the one who'd knelt in snow before a starving woman and her pack, who'd transformed and wept at being accepted.
Who visited a wolf sanctuary like it was coming home. "You're not lonely here," she observed. "No," he admitted, "I'm not." The silence between them was comfortable, full of understanding. Silver lifted her head and looked between them with those intelligent eyes, then deliberately moved to rest her head on Theon's knee instead. The gesture was clear: acceptance, permission, welcome to the pack. Theon's hand shook slightly as he stroked the old alpha's fur. Then he looked at Marin with an expression that was equal parts hope and fear. "Stay," she said simply. "Not as a king visiting a project, as pack, as family. If you want that, I want that more than anything. Then welcome home." The years that followed were the happiest of both their lives. Theon split his time between ruling the kingdom and living at the sanctuary. Marin expanded her work, rescuing other animals deemed dangerous and finding ways for humans and wildlife to coexist. They built something unprecedented together, a partnership that honored both his royal duties and her calling. The court eventually accepted it because the results were undeniable. Animal attacks decreased across the kingdom as Marin's methods spread. The sanctuary became a place of learning where scholars studied animal behavior. Children from nearby villages visited to learn respect for wildlife rather than fear. And the king, who'd been cold and distant for centuries, became more accessible and human. They married 3 years after that first meeting, a simple ceremony in the sanctuary with the wolf pack as witnesses. Silver, ancient now but still sharp, stood between them during the vows. When they kissed, the entire pack howled, and it sounded like celebration. Marin wore flowers in her hair and a dress she'd sewn herself. Theon wore formal attire, but removed his crown before the ceremony. "Today I'm just a man marrying the woman who taught me what it means to be pack. Not subjects, not citizens, family." Marin's vows were simpler but no less profound. "I choose you as I chose them, completely, without reservation. You're part of my pack now, and I protect my pack, always." They built a life that honored both their natures. Theon ruled with increased compassion, his policies reflecting the empathy Marin had taught him. Marin continued her work, now with resources and authority to effect real change. And together they proved that strength and gentleness weren't opposites, but complementary forces. Silver lived 3 more years, long enough to see Marin and Theon's first child born, a daughter who inherited her mother's gift with animals and her father's ability to shift. The old alpha met the baby once,
touched her nose to the infant's hand, and seemed satisfied. She died peacefully in her sleep that night, with Marin beside her, humming the lullaby she'd always loved. They buried Silver in the sanctuary with a marker that read, Alpha, Mother, Teacher, Friend. May all who follow learn her wisdom, that family is built through love, not blood, and strength is knowing when to be gentle. Marin grieved hard, but not hopelessly. Silver had lived a full life, had seen her pack thrive, had died surrounded by love. That was everything a wolf could ask for. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Theon took Marin back to that clearing where everything changed. The snow had returned, covering the ground in white, but the forest was different now, healthier, thriving, protected. I think about that day constantly, he said, how close I came to destroying something beautiful because I only saw the threat, not the context. How you stood there with nothing but conviction and changed my entire understanding of power. Marin leaned against him, watching their daughter play with young wolves in the distance. You were already changing. I just gave you permission to be who you actually were under all that royal armor.
A man who'd been alone for 300 years because he couldn't find others who understood his dual nature. She looked up at him. Do you remember what you did? That first day, you bowed. An immortal king knelt in snow before a starving woman and her pack. Because I recognized something greater than myself, he said. You had nothing, and you gave everything. You faced death without flinching to protect your family. That's the kind of strength kingdoms are built on. The kind I'd spent centuries trying to embody, but never truly understood until I saw you living it. Their daughter ran over, wolves tumbling around her, and threw her arms around both parents. Mama, Papa, come play. The pack wants to teach me hunting. Marin laughed. All right, little one, but remember, we only hunt what we need, and we give thanks for what we take. Always respect, never waste. The child nodded seriously, then raced back to the wolves with all the confidence of someone who'd never learned to fear them. Theon watched his family, this impossible, beautiful family he'd found by accident, and felt the last pieces of 300 years of loneliness finally heal. Thank you, he said quietly, for showing me what I was missing, for teaching me that being beast doesn't mean being monster, for building a pact that accepted me when I'd forgotten what acceptance felt like. Marin took his hand. Thank you for seeing us, for choosing protection over extermination, for understanding that different doesn't mean dangerous, for being brave enough to kneel. They stood together in the snow, the Beast King and the Wolf Woman, watching their daughter learn the language of creatures most people would never understand, surrounded by the pact they'd saved and been saved by. Living proof that the strongest bonds are built not through dominance, but through the courage to be gentle with things that could destroy you, and the wisdom to recognize family in unexpected forms. If this story reminded you that true strength is knowing when to be gentle, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment with the word moon if you believe the most powerful act is choosing compassion over conquest. Share this video with someone who needs to know that being different isn't a weakness, it's a superpower waiting to be understood. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is bow before something greater than yourself. Thanks for watching, and remember, family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one that accepts you exactly as you are.